Welcome. We're very, very lucky today. We might even say blessed. There's an incident in this book on an airplane that uses that word to have Bill Donahue with us, Dr. Donahue. He's the head of the Catholic League, and I think you've been the head of the Catholic League forever. I mean, as long as I've known you, it's incredible. Your official biography says, I have it here, you're the author of 11 books, but we're going to discuss your 12th book, which
No,
is
that's number 12. Yes.
number 12, Christianity and the Crosshairs, Ruling Class and Radicals Find a Common Enemy, which I literally just finished reading this morning. And I found it absolutely fascinating. It's just packed with all sorts of information. As I said, each chapter could probably be a separate book about what's happening in the United States, not just to Catholics, but to Christianity, which is very reminiscent, honestly, of what happens in a communist revolution or even in a liberal revolution. We were in Guatemala on a cruise, and I didn't know they had a liberal dictatorship supported by the British, where they had a liberal dictator who closed Catholic churches and persecuted the church. So, I mean, lots of dictators like to go after the Catholic Church. So Bill's been doing this for a long time, and he has so many honors and awards. I know he's a PhD in sociology, and we talked to him about some of his past books on this, but I don't want to waste time on this because we only have a half an hour. I'd like to go straight to this book. Why did you write Christianity in the Crosshairs?
Basically, to get rid of the myth that the ruling class and radicals are totally opposite. It is true that throughout most of history, you'll see that they were not working together. But what's happened in more recent times, over the last couple of decades, you've seen a conflation. The extent to which the elites, I'm talking about the major decision makers in our society, in government, in business, in Silicon Valley, in the entertainment industry, in the arts, certainly in education, the major decision makers are basically hostile to religion in general, and to Christianity in particular. And the bullseye, of course, would be Catholicism. They've embraced a kind of a militant secular ideology. So here you see the radicalization, what's going on in the university. It always begins in the academy, doesn't it, Lawrence? It begins in the academy with the professors. They've taught the hate America agenda now for decades, and it's been picked up by some of the people who are the elites. The elites are the ones with the postgraduate degrees. They are the ones who are the most left in our society. So it's not just George Soros, for example, who's funding Black Lives Matter. You've had Amazon and you've had Apple, Silicon Valley. You've seen Neville Roy Singham. People never heard of him. Neville Roy Singham lives in Shanghai. He made hundreds of millions in the United States with his software company. He's tied in with the communist Chinese, and he is the one who's providing money for different organizations on the left that even they used it as a pass-through Goldman Sachs. So what I'm saying is that this is something altogether new, and their goal was best expressed by Bill Ivey, 2016, an advisor to Hillary Clinton, and he said, our goal is the compliant citizenry, a docile, passive people. Huxley warned about it in Brave New World in 1932, and then later Orwell talked about it in 1984. We're dealing with a kind of a soft totalitarianism. You're not dealing with Hitler, Stalin, and Mao and the kind of violence they unleashed. You're talking about people like C.S. Lewis said, be careful of the quiet men, the men in the suits. John Paul II called it soft totalitarianism. Montesquieu warned in the 18th century about the democratic despotism. And Tocqueville in the 19th century used that very term, democratic despotism. This is a softer kind of role. They want to seduce people intellectually. They want us to be obedient, and then they can control us. It's all about power. It's all about control.
Okay, well, many times people made the same types of charges in the past in America against the Catholic Church, that there was a conspiracy from Rome, and of course all of Latin America was from the Spanish Empire and was Catholic, and the Protestants felt that the Catholics were trying to take over the country. And Digby Baltzell, who and John Murray Cudahy are two sociologists I've read on this, and they said, well, the response of the American Catholic has become more patriotic than the Protestants. In other words, Catholics are more pro-American than the Protestant elite. Do you see this as actually just control for control's sake, or do you see perhaps that people see the church as a barrier to communism? Traditionally, say in Poland, for example, the church was seen as an opponent of communism.
Well, you're absolutely right. And here's the problem for the ruling class taking the radical ideas now they've kind of come together. They want us to be in communion with them. They know that in order to exert the kind of power and control that they want, to get the compliant citizenry that Ivy talked about, they have to really go after the two institutions that most Americans identify with, namely the family and religion. If you can break people in their family, if you can break their ties to their religion, to their God, now you leave people in lurch, and they'll look for some type of communion with the state. Hitler understood this. Stalin understood it. Now, they use violent means. We're not talking about violence today. We're talking about something more sinister. It's more seductive. Oh, yeah, they'll send in the FBI to spy with Catholics in the churches. That's what the devout Catholic Biden did with his administration. They'll use those tactics, but they often use thought control. They want to control the way you think. And they do that by saying you must identify a man who thinks he's a woman as a woman. No, it's a he. You see, people think that this is just a small potatoes. They want to control the way you think. And that's why language, of course, and Orwell understood this very well, is one of the major ways they can do this. So we're talking about something that's much more sinister than the old-fashioned violent way of getting their way. But the family and religion have got to go. They've got to be disabled if the ruling class is going to succeed.
Now, you say ruling class, and yet many of these things are quite radical. Do you see let's just take New York, where I know the church and Mamdani have been in conflict before the election, during the election, and after I believe he snubbed the bishops recently with his inauguration. Do you actually see this just as control, or is it control for a purpose? And that the ruling class, in other words, the old explanation I used to have was, well, the elite now are very happy to be leftist because they can have their orgies, like on Epstein Island, but they get to keep their money. And that's the deal they made with the communists. Like in China, you could do business as long as you supported the party. But now we see with Mamdani, the left is, or California with the wealth tax, the left is coming after the money of the leftist billionaires. What do you see that as part of?
Well, let me pick up on what you said there about the control and the elements there. The Marxists, particularly the cultural Marxists, and Marx himself believed that there's no such thing as human nature. It was a social construct. So therefore, we can just simply change the environment, which will change people, will change human nature, and we'll get this wonderful state, this messianic state called communism, where you can do anything that you want. We don't have to have even a police, because everyone will love each other, because you'll get rid of private property. Now, the ruling class today, they've gone in somewhat of a different direction. But if you take a look at Davos, Switzerland, and the new economic forum, and what they're looking at, they want to reset society. What do you mean reset? Well, they want us to change the way we think, the way we behave. They have all kinds of grandiose plans for us. They also don't believe that there's anything fixed, such as human nature, which it is fixed. You can't change human nature. This is one of the greatest myths that the left has ever understood. So in order for them to get the kind of maximum control that they want, they've got to go after the family. They've got to go after religion. They're using many different tactics to do that. Abortion is the greatest enemy of the family, and that's one of the reasons why they want abortion. They want abortion on demand. All these things are very much tied together. By the way, there's no conspiracy here. I'm not a conspiratorialist. In a conspiracy, you have a degree of latency. This is right out in the open for people to see. And yes, there are billionaires who are funding this, even if you say, well, aren't they raising the taxes? These people are so filthy rich, you couldn't tax them enough to really bankrupt them. The people like under Mondani, who you mentioned, who are paying the price, he wants to raise property taxes by 10%, 9.5. Who do you think they're going to hit? They're going to hit the shop owners, going to hit the renters. Oh, he said about affordability. He's going to hit the people who are trying to make a living. There's not enough money at the top for them to get them anyway. So yeah, you see Mondani getting his support from a lot of the wealthy. Now some of them are getting scared because they realize this guy means business.
All right. So and where does the church fit in? I mean, one of the things they did in the Russian Revolution, for example, but they also did it in Mexico. In fact, Henry VIII did it, confiscate church property. Do you see that as something that may be coming down the line?
Well, Jared Huffman is a congressman out in California, and he came out a couple of years ago and said we have to get rid of the tax-exempt status of the churches. And he was really going after the Catholic Church. Why? Because of abortion, because we're pro-life. Back in the 1980s, the ACLU filed an amicus brief with the Abortion Mobilization Incorporated to take away the tax-exempt status of the Catholic Church. That's the way they'd like to go with it first. They're not going to go after, all the other groups that get they don't have to pay taxes in the nonprofit world. So that's the way they're going to do it if they can get away with it. I do think, however, believe me, I am not a doomsdayer. All right, we're talking here about some serious threats, and they're all detailed in my book. But there's no iron law of history. We can push back, and we're seeing it already. How the ruling class are beginning to rethink DEI. They're beginning to rethink this great expression of child abuse, to take a minor and perform sex reassignment surgery because some young guy or girl is going through a bad patch. These monster doctors and hospitals that have been doing this and the therapists, that's beginning to wane. So anybody who says that the ruling class and the radicals are going to prevail for all time is wrong. We can push back, and while the pushback is too small for me, to satisfy me, I am encouraged by some of the things that I see.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're optimistic. Some of the things in your book, though, are pretty shocking. There's a section where you discuss infiltration of the Catholic Church by communists starting in the 1950s, it sounds like, where they're actually placing people in seminaries and they're going up and becoming bishops and so forth and so on. And I just read today, an American thinker, Notre Dame University falls to woke ideology, or Notre Dame as we call it. And apparently they've appointed a professor who promotes abortion as head of one of their major institutes. And that was sort of, when I was young, it was liberals, Father Hesburgh, but it was sort of the premier Catholic school in the United States. What's going on?
Well, you mentioned two things. I want to address them both. It was back in the 1950s that Bella Dowd, who was a Catholic, then became an atheist and a communist, and then came back to the Catholic Church through Archbishop Sheen. She testified before the Congress that she and others in the Communist Party had succeeded in putting approximately 1,200 young men into the seminaries. They did so for one purpose, to subvert the Catholic Church. That's a matter of historical record. More recently, you've got a different situation. It's not the Communist Party as such, because there are elements. I'm just saying elements. I'm not saying the entire Democratic Party. There are elements of the Democratic Party today which have laid anchor with communist thinking. And that's where the threat is coming from. Regarding Notre Dame, there's a woman there by the name of Susan Osterman. And she is a professor who's now been promoted by Father Dowd, the new president, to run a Lou Institute. She's not only pro-abortion, worse, she speaks in the most vile, vicious way about the attempts by Catholics and others in the crisis pregnancy centers to give women thinking about an abortion an alternative, to put the baby up for adoption. She's totally opposed to them. She said that's terrible, that we shouldn't even have these things. Now, here's the good thing. There are people who have won pro-life medals there have now come together in a coalition to lobby the priest who's responsible for making this decision. Board of trustees are involved. You've got at least a dozen bishops involved. Notre Dame has some very good people working there, by the way, but they also have some problem people. And in this case right here, the problem begins at the very top with Father Dowd.
All right, but to tell me a little bit about the church, because as I may have said, 1/3 of the Catholics in New York City voted for Donahue, who was pretty openly anti-Catholic, and is now pursuing anti-Catholic policies. So, how do you fix a problem like that?
Well, look, if you ask people in a survey, are you Catholic? And they answer and they say yes, do they ever do the follow-up? Not too many of them do. When's the last time you went to church? Are you a practicing Catholic? Or do you go once a year, or do you not go at all? So self-identification on the basis of religion is very similar to self-identification in terms of sex. If a guy says he's a woman, we know he's crazy, that he's not. Now, if you're a Catholic and you haven't gone to church, in fact, you could be an anti-Catholic. You could be a dissident. And those are more or less the people who have been answering that way. Yeah, 1 out of every 3 Catholics, 1 out of every 3 Jews, shame on both of them, did vote for Donahue. But he promised an awful lot, and he couldn't have gotten in there without the help of the Asian community, which came in pretty big for him. Not all Asians, but too many of them. And a lot of young white people, particularly a lot of young, well-educated white women out of Brooklyn, where he did better in Brooklyn than any of the boroughs whatsoever. But there's a lot of people now who are beginning to have second thoughts because he promised to be Santa Claus and give everybody everything for nothing. Now he knows that he doesn't have the money. The only authority he has is to raise property taxes, which is a regressive tax, and it punishes the working class because he doesn't have the authority to raise the sales tax or the income tax. He has to go to Albany for that. And last week, he got $1.5 billion from Governor Hochul and the Albany legislature. The very next day, he said, it's not enough. I need more money, or I'm going to have to raise property taxes by 9.5%. The man's a train wreck, and he's a fraud.
Well, you've been saying that before he was elected, but to me, he represents, in a way, one pathway for the whole country. In other words, it's sort of a paradigm shift or whatever, where we're going to adopt a new form of politics, which was although in your book, you talk about the only communist member of Congress with an actual card, Italian-American Vito Marco Antonio, who I assume at one point his family must have been Catholic, being Italian. So there's always been, Sacco and Vanzetti, et cetera, a left, and I have a good friend from childhood who converted to Catholicism, became a follower of Dorothy Day, now works for the Mary Knowles. He's, wanted to be a saint, wonderful guy, went to Mother Teresa, et cetera. So there is sort of a Christian socialism that has a long history. But, some of these people are very well-meaning. We have to be aware of that. But they're used, I think, for nefarious purposes. That said, you said all of this is non-violent. But, we had that attack on the Annunciation Catholic Church in Minneapolis, a gunman, a massacre on August 27th, 2025, a transgender gunman. We just had this church invasion in St. Paul, led by Don Lemon, where they busted into a Protestant church, disrupting the service, terrifying people. You remember, because you wrote about it, during the AIDS crisis, people throwing blood in St. Patrick's Cathedral, disrupting services. We had a Catholic friend, a convert from Episcopalianism in Washington, who said in her church, protesters would come in on the abortion issue and disrupt Mass. So how nonviolent is that?
Well, there's no question. And we've written a lot about this in terms of Jane's Revenge and Antifa. And in fact, we've worked with the Trump administration, the Religious Liberty Commission, by turning over a trove of documents which details this. Yes, there is that element there of the violence, and I don't want to dismiss it. But I think the more pernicious and sinister way is that they want to seduce us intellectually. That's what this is about. When you have the compliant citizenry, how are they going to make you compliant? They're going to give you bread and circus, just like they did with the Romans. They're going to have universal basic income. We're going to legalize all kinds of drugs. This is working out very well because now these people are basically functioning as zombies. And if your goal is a docile, passive citizenry, then this plays to their playbook. So yeah, they'll use violence here and there, and they'll have the FBI spy on Catholics and the like. and the ruthless people. Meanwhile, the left will say, our biggest threat today is Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism? What are they talking about? They have to invent boogeymen to deflect from what really is the problem, which is more or less coming from
let me
Antifa.
interrupt you there, because I read that chapter with great interest, because we get First Things, and that's supposedly a Catholic publication. And it has a cover story in this current month's issue in praise or in defense of Christian nationalism. And the author says it's a good thing. So, I mean, somebody knows. I mean, it used to be called, I believe, the Christian Identity Movement when I was in Washington, and it was Protestant because the Catholics weren't included. Because the idea was America was a Protestant nation founded, by Puritans or whatever. And so this has been going on a long time in the United States. The role of religion versus the state. But one thing we always had was freedom of religion. So that would say you'd have more than one, because otherwise, what do you need freedom of religion for? So let's talk about this a little, because Christian nationalism is used as a boogeyman. It's used to scare people. Other people say, well, that's a good thing, because it's just saying we're based on good Christian principles. So it's a little more complicated, isn't it?
Listen, the article you're talking about in First Things by R.R. Reno, who is a Catholic. First Things is not Catholic publication; it's interreligious, but he's the editor, and so he's Catholic. Okay, he's talking about Christian nationalism in the sense of patriotism and how we have to have more Christian moral values. I think the weakness of his article is that he never engaged intellectually the people on the left, like Robert P. George, not my friend Robbie George from Princeton University, Robert P. George, and some sociologists whom I've written about. On the left, they're talking about something altogether. Reno never even mentions them, like as if they don't even exist in his article. So he has a right to do that. He was talking about the better end of being Christian and being patriotic. These other people have an agenda. They're saying that if you believe that we should have a greater role of Christianity in our society, therefore you want a theocracy and take over, it's all a lie. I mean, you always find a few screwballs, some wackos in every group. How in the world would you say they're emblematic of most Christians is nonsense. And indeed, I just read the report by this group that came out about Christian nationalism, and they're saying these people promote political violence. Actually, if you take a look at the surveys by FIRE, the Freedom and Individual Rights Organization, the people who believe in violence as a way to solve things are on the left. They're not on the right. They're not conservatives. They're amongst the best educated people in our society. So Reno is actually talking past these people, and that's what accounts for what it looks like an apparent contradiction. He's really talking past the left.
Okay, but the point is, the word is out there. People took the bait, and instead of talking about Christian patriots, although they didn't used to like patriotism either, they used to say dissent is the highest form of patriotism. But then, under the Biden administration, suddenly obedience was the highest form of patriotism. Let's talk about the role of the church going forward. By the way, did you see Melania? Did you see the scene where she goes into St. Patrick's for the blessing?
I did not. I've been so wrapped up with things here. I did not.
Oh, okay. It's quite an enjoyable film. It's like very old-fashioned, sort of like they used to do with Jackie Kennedy. And, they tried to humanize Melania. And to me, she sounds like Zsa Zsa Gabor, or Eva Gabor on Green Acres. But, they have everybody's her fashion designer. They're all immigrants, and she loves immigrants. And she goes and she hugs an Israeli hostage. She just loves everybody. And poor First Lady, she has to be schlepped around in these SUVs all the time, and they go in the garage and etc. But there's a big scene where she goes in, and I've closed the cathedral for her, goes into the cathedral to light a candle for her mother who's died. And then the priests say, would you like a blessing? And they bless her. And she looks visibly moved by that. And I thought they were making some sort of statement there. We have a Catholic First Lady. And what do you see the significance of that as?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's very well known about her religion. She certainly doesn't wear it on her sleeve, and I don't think most Americans know. And part of the problem there is that every first lady winds up on the cover of the women's magazines, Vogue, and all these other ones, Vanity Fair. But no one will put her on the cover of any of these magazines, so people don't really get a chance to know her. I guess one of the reasons why they did this movie is because they wanted to get out something about her that's not just tainted by the left-wing media and their friends in Hollywood as a kind of a riposte to them, and I'm happy about that. But I don't think most people really identify her as such in terms of her religion. I mean, Trump himself is basically a non-practicing Protestant Methodist, as far as I understand. I happen to say he's more religion-friendly than the self-described devout Catholic who was his predecessor in the White House, that phony Joe Biden, who did more to punish Catholics threatening to take away their tax-exempt status and the like. So if a person is not a practicing whatever, that's between him and her and their God. That's not my business. My business is to deal with the policy decision-making that affects religion in the public square. And to that extent, with Trump, we're victorious, and we're making a lot of strides coming off the heels of the most anti-Catholic administration in American history, run by a nominal Catholic.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting how that works a lot. I mean, I'm Jewish. A lot of very anti-Jewish people happen to be Jewish. So, I mean, in politics, especially this state representative, senator, I guess, in California, Scott Wiener, who accused Israel of genocide. Speaking of which, I did say I would bring this up. What do you think of this Religious Liberty Commission? I mean, I personally think it's all a setup to cause division and split the Trump coalition. And I suspect dark forces. I may be more of a conspiracy nut than you are, where Carrie Prejean Burrell got into this fight about Zionism in Israel with some witness and sort of took the whole thing off the rails. That's all anybody heard. What is going on with I know you had mentioned the Liberty Commission in our last talk. I mean, what is going on with that commission, and how do you see them being able to help solve this problem of the anti-religious agenda of the left?
We may have a difference of opinion on this. I happen to know most of the people on the commission, and they're good people like Cardinal Dolan and Eric Metaxas and some of the good rabbis and people there. This woman is a real lemon, and I think the problem is in the vetting process. Why would you accept this woman? I know when she was Miss California, she was asked a question about marriage and gays, and she gave a very impolitic answer, politically incorrect, and then the Christians said that's a great thing. Okay, fine. She has no credentials. She has no academic credentials. She's never written anything. She doesn't run anything in her whole life. She's brand new to the Catholic Church. So how dare she come out there and speak for all Catholics, which is what she did, by the way, Larry. I mean, I don't speak for all Catholics. I speak for the Catholic League, and obviously for people who agree with me, not all of whom are Catholic, I'm proud to say. But she doesn't represent anybody. She should never have been on there in the first place. That was the real problem. I came out and condemned her very quickly and said she's got to go. She's a Jew hater, and she walks around with a Palestinian flag button. And you're on a panel where you're supposed to be fighting religious bigotry? No, the people who should be fired, besides her, which is good, are the people who did the vetting process and allowed her to slip through. But I do think, in fairness to the most of the members on there, whom I do know, there's a lot of good Catholics, Protestants, and Jews. And I know that the Muslim people, I don't know them personally, but they've been vetted carefully. This woman, Prejean, Miss California, should go back to her previous occupation.
Okay, but let's talk about in general, what do you think would be the number one priority for this commission to accomplish? And there's not much time, about 2.5 years. What can they do?
Well, they have to make certain that we lock in all religious exemptions. I mean, I've been doing this job since 1993. We know each other from at least that time, if not earlier. And I can tell you that I've seen a lot of threats to religion in our society. And I mean religion here, all houses of worship, not just Christian. There are a lot of people who want to take away the tax exempt status, but that's kind of difficult to do it's easier to take away the religious exemptions. So for example, we have in 1993, President Clinton signed an act of Congress, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It's a wonderful piece of legislation. The Equality Act, fast forward, is not law, but the Democrats want to make it law. They have not succeeded. If they succeed with the Equality Act, it's basically a pro-gay piece of legislation. In that legislation, it says we're not going to apply the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Why? Because it gives too many protections to religion and to houses of worship. In other words, the goal has to be to lock in, to slam dunk the religious exemptions that we have on the law now, and to have more of them, because that's what the left wants. They want to secularize houses of worship and religious institutions. That's their ultimate goal, in which case, at that point, you've neutered them, and they don't exist anymore. They become secular. That's the greatest threat I see in general.
All right. And just to wrap it up, because I know time is short, Pope Leo is the first American Pope. How do you see his role? I mean, if anyone speaks for the church, it's Pope Leo. And what can he do in the United States to protect not only the Catholic Church and Catholics, but Christians in general, and in the bigger picture, religious liberty?
Well, so far he's been walking rather carefully. His predecessor, Pope Francis, would speak off the cuff, got himself all kinds of trouble, particularly on the papal plane, coming back from some place in Brazil or wherever he was. He's walking much more softly. I'm hoping he picks it up at some point, and that he affirms for Catholics the Latin Mass, which is in jeopardy because Pope Francis declared war on it. And I think he has to start with Catholics and reassuring us. But I think that you're going to see him not take the extreme measures that his predecessor did, but we're looking for some greater degree of orthodoxy, because Pope Francis, while he did some good things, he also fed the dissident line of thought within the Catholic Church. So I'm asking, I'd like to see Pope Leo become somewhat more orthodox in his thinking. He turned down an opportunity to be on this special panel with Peace USA because he thinks that, we still should look into the United Nations. I'm not going to read too much into that, but a lot of Catholics are still waiting and looking at the tea leaves to see which way he's going to go. I think he's going to be a moderate. I don't think he's going to be on the left the way Francis was on a lot of issues, but he's not going to be John Paul II or Pope Benedict XVI, who I think were the two best in my lifetime.
All right. Well, with that, I thank you. And I want to plug your book, which I think is certainly worth reading. And especially the amount of information in it is just, it's not a fat book. And I don't know how you packed, like, every page has just, it was, even for me, how much data you compressed into a very readable form as a background. You certainly make the case that Christianity is under attack by a alliance of the ruling class and radicals. If we have one more second, though, one thing you didn't go into too much is the issue of Islam, because there's some places in the Middle East, even in the Gulf states, where they've now tolerant Islam, where they have churches. And I lived in Uzbekistan, which had a giant Catholic cathedral. It was a Muslim country. But there's another strain of Islam, which is very fundamentalist, which is actually very anti-Christian. And you see in New York City now the rise. I think they're having the call to prayer 5 times a day, even at night, and the rise of militant Islam in New York and in other American cities. And at a certain point, there's a nice chat about ecumenical feeling, but what happens when there is a conflict between fundamentalist Islam and, say, traditional Christianity? What's the way forward?
They've got to be defeated. Look, the biggest threats to people of religion today are coming from the extremists on the secular side and the extremists on the religious side. There are a lot of secular Americans. They're not a threat. I'm talking about the militant secularists, many of them in the ruling class. That's what the book is about. But I'm also talking about here the extremists on the religious side, particularly the Islamic. They're called Islamist as opposed to being Islamic themselves, the Islamist, the radical ones, not the ordinary Muslims. Unfortunately, they've gained a lot of ground. Now, in Nigeria, they just go in and kill the people. The Muslims are in the north and the Catholics are in the south, and they go down there and they just kill them. In this country here, there's been an emboldenment on the part of radical Muslims because of people like Mandani, who's made it very clear that Catholics and Jews are not welcome at his table. Where it will wind up, I don't know, but there's got to be resistance. And we can't take it lightly, because I don't think Mandani has the best interests of Catholics and Jews in mind, even though we are the vast majority of New Yorkers. And that's what's perverse. So those 1/3 of Catholics and 1/3 of Jews, shame on you. I hope you wake up, because this guy's not on your side.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll stay tuned. Are you planning another book, or are you done now?
I'm thinking about doing a memoir.
Oh, well, that would be interesting, I have to say.
I can lace a lot of
some
people.
colorful stories.
I have a lot of colorful
popes
stories.
and potentates, and you've known ordinary Joes in the bar down the street, and everything else. So I think you'd have a lot of stories to tell that people would enjoy. Well, I look forward to reading that. That should be a very and a change of pace too. So okay, well, thank you. God bless you, as they say on the airlines. And people come. Alaska Airlines, by the way, which is in your book, was founded by Christian evangelicals, and it was very involved in the airlift of the Ethiopian Jews to Israel that was done in the Bush administration. They offered their planes for free out of Christian solidarity, to bring about the second coming. So the ingathering of the exiles is required. But I thank you. And I recommend your book to everyone. I do recommend you see Melania. You can take your wife if she likes fashion. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. And I hope I see you someday. And I wish you were in the Trump administration. I keep saying that, but maybe one day you'll do something like that. So
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're very kind.
Bye-bye.
Have a great weekend.
Okay.